what guidance would you give to someone to say, here's how to go from where you are to finding your North Star and taking steps in that direction?
Um, I think that I was at a place where there were no, uh, I didn't have a choice.
Mm,
I had this burning desire to take control of my life myself. I'd had a series of jobs, and I went from making so little I couldn't keep the lights on to making a lot of money. And I owned a couple of houses, and all this happened very quickly. And yet I was working for a man who did not appreciate me. I was what I consider an ideal employee. I was a straight commission sales rep, but I dedicated my life to his company. And yet, when I approached him to share some ideas with him about how our company could get better, and I shouldn't say that, it wasn't our company, it was his company. And I approached him with ways to make his company more successful. And he patronizingly patted my hand and said, Sherry, you don't know anything about business.
mm,
Why don't you just go sell another account? And that was a pivotal moment for me, an epiphany, because I knew I didn't have that master's in business degree that he had from Vanderbilt, but I had common sense.
mhm.
And I no longer wanted to be in a place where somebody didn't appreciate me and didn't appreciate the gifts that I had. And so I just took the leap. And I think a lot of people would have at the time thought I was crazy, because I'd gone to making, so little I couldn't keep the lights on, to making about 16 grand a month. And this was 20 years ago, so it was a lot. And at that time, I'd gone from being a single mom to being still a single mom with a teenage daughter who had just had a baby. So, there's 3 generations living in my household that I was responsible for. And to give up that steady income to start a business was crazy. But I didn't want to be beholden to anybody again. And I thought that, although I didn't have the degree, I had something that he didn't have that I thought would serve me well.
Mhm.
And I think for people who have the entrepreneurial bone, it just can't be denied. You just have to do it. And then once you have that, where you are your own boss and nobody else is telling you what to do, it's really hard to go back. One of the practices that we had in this crazy company that I built was something we called a mistake quota. And so we had each of the senior leaders met with me once a month, and they had to present the biggest personal or professional mistake they'd made in the previous month and what they learned from it. And so we learned to celebrate those failures and to celebrate the hardships, because there were important lessons to be learned.
Mhm.
And we shared them, one, to make everybody comfortable being vulnerable and really honest.
Yeah.
But so that the rest of us can learn from their mistakes and not have that mistake, or not make that same mistake ourselves. So there's something to be said for celebrating the tough times.
A lot of times people talk about, yeah, I'm building a business. Once it's successful, I'll think about culture. I'll think about values, right? Your approach was very different. Walk us through what it was like.
From day one, I established the company in a way that would put the employees first. And that meant I went to potential customers to say, I want your business. I really do. But you have to understand that this company doesn't believe that the customer comes first. My employees come first. And then I explained to them what that meant in our company. So it was making sure the employees had a voice. And in doing that, I created formal and informal ways to listen to the employees on a regular basis. It meant really paying them a fair living wage. And Nikki, I could talk a whole hour about what that means. It meant letting them bring their kids to work and their pets to work whenever they wanted or whenever they needed. And so sometimes our company felt more like a zoo, but it was very family-like in that way. You had
Yeah.
kids here, and most of the time they hung out in my office. We helped employees buy their first homes, because that is such
Mhm.
a part of at least the American dream of home
Right.
ownership. And so helping them buy their first homes, and then importantly, and right at the core, was sharing the profits.
Mm-hmm.
I think there were, three basic practices that we had that were crucial to our success. One was listening.
Mm-hmm.
Two was in being totally transparent, sharing the books with the employees so they knew how much money we made. And then um, the third, which is really the most important, which was sharing the profits with them. And
Mm-hmm.
so we had a very unique profit sharing plan, unlike anything I'd ever heard about before.
You also put another leadership principle into practice, which is lunch with Lucy. So let's dive into that, because not only is it the title of your book, but it comes from something that you practice in your company that was pivotal to your culture. So who is Lucy?
Well, Lucy is my alter ego. So I wanted to set up a regular time to have lunch with employees, where they would invite me to lunch. I picked up the tab, but they would choose the restaurant, um, and it seemed it's not very sexy to have lunch with the CEO. Or not very. That doesn't sound like fun, doesn't lunch with the CEO? So I just made it lunch with Lucy, so that I was just a coworker, very accessible, non-threatening, and I carved out that hour and a half every Wednesday for them. So they chose the restaurant, and they also chose who else would go with us to lunch.
Mm.
So most of the time it was just the two of us, but sometimes it was a family member they wanted me to meet. Sometimes it was their entire department, um, but importantly, it was about them. Lunch with Lucy was about Lucy listening. And so I got to hear about the challenges that they faced every morning before they came into work,
Mm-hmm.
and what unique challenges they faced when they went home. And I got to hear about what they wanted out of life and what their goals were. Often goals that they had to put aside to make a living and work in my factory. Uh, and then crucial learning during that time was they told me firsthand what they thought of my leadership and what they thought I was doing wrong, and what they needed from me to make them more effective in their jobs.
What were some of the hardest times for you as an entrepreneur that you overcame during that time?
I think that what's common to women is lack of confidence,
Mm-hmm.
and that struck me at several times in our company growth. And so, because I didn't have a college education, and I felt like there were so many things I didn't know, there were a couple of times in our history where I hired in other people to. I was still CEO in name, but I pushed a lot of the responsibility onto other people
Mm.
to lead, and they quickly got us on a bad track, away from our empathic business model and more into regular corporate structures. And in one time in particular, a man who had all the right credentials, but he was derailing us. And it was my lack of confidence that caused
Mm.
that. And so I jumped back in the fray, got rid of him, and realized that nobody was more qualified to lead my company than me, um,
Mm.
especially because I had this unorthodox business model and structure, and that I wasn't going to let go of that, and I couldn't entrust it to anyone else at that moment. So I think most of the hardships came, I brought on myself
Mm-hmm.
because of not having more faith in my own ability.
What techniques, have you employed that have helped you sort of in that moment, not the ultimate decision, but actually overcome that sort of imposter syndrome or the lack of confidence? Is there something that a woman who's in this situation right now might listen in and say, okay, I can use, this is a framework that I can use?
I'd say two things. One, knowledge and depth of knowledge and breadth of knowledge takes away that lack of confidence.
Mm,
For me, that meant me learning the financials of the company so that I didn't have to entrust anyone else to it. I knew it instinctively. But I think more importantly is having peers who can tell you where your blind spots are. I mean, that's why they're called blind spots, because you're not even aware of them.
yeah.
And so I got that through my association with EO, that's the Entrepreneurs Organization, and through WPO, the Women's Presidents Organization,
Mhm.
where I had peers who could point out to me where my weaknesses were, and
Mhm.
then hold me accountable to change. And I remember one of our exercises, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, which I still think about often, was where we wrote, each of us wrote about the other members, what we thought were their strengths, what we thought their brand was, and where we saw warning signs. So not a weakness, but a warning sign.
Mm.
And that was so empowering. And I encourage women to do that with a group of friends or peers. You have strengths that you don't even know you have.
Mhm.